Go.
Hello and welcome to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Lara Ehrlich, and tonight we have a special show about writing, motherhood, and sex with 3 writers of romance. Writer Mother Monster conversations are streamed live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and then released as an audio podcast on all major platforms. As always, please chat with us during the live interview. Your comments will appear in our broadcast studio and we'll weave them into our conversation. And a special thanks to our sponsors and patrons listed on the Writer Mother Monster website. Your support helps make this show possible. And if you enjoy the episode, please become a patron or patroness to help keep the podcast going. Look for details at writermothermonster.com. Now, I'm excited to introduce our guests. A former critical defense attorney, Tracey Livesay finds crafting believable, happily ever afters slightly more challenging than protecting our constitutional rights, but she's never regretted following her heart instead of her law degree. She has been featured in Entertainment Weekly, The Washington Post, and CBS Mornings. Tracey lives in Virginia with her husband, who she met on the very first day of law school, and their 3 children, ages 18, 16, and 15. She describes writer motherhood in 3 words as overwhelming, empowering, affirming. Cat Sebastian lives in a swampy part of the South with her family and her dog. Before her kids were born, she practiced law, another lawyer, and taught high school and college writing. When she isn't reading or writing, she's doing crossword puzzles, bird watching, and wondering where she put her coffee cup. She has 3 middle school-aged children and describes writer motherhood in 3 words as never not worrying. And Julie Tieu is a Chinese-American writer born and raised in Southern California. When she's not writing or working as a college counselor, she's reading, on the hunt for delicious eats, or dreaming about her next travel adventure. She lives in the LA area with her high school crush husband and 2 energetic daughters who are under the age of 10. She describes writer motherhood in 3 words as a juggling act. Now, join me in welcoming Tracey, Kat, and Julie. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining me. As I mentioned before we all went live here, I've been longing to have a romance panel for a long time. So this is a first for Writer Mother Monster. And I love romance as a genre. I love all of your work. I'm excited to see you. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. I think, so usually I talk first about the 3 words you use to describe writer motherhood, but I think instead, let's do, let's start with romance and just tell us briefly what draws you to the romance genre. And we'll start maybe with Kat because she's to my whatever direction that is.
Sure. It actually ties into the 3 words. I really started reading romance seriously when my kids were little. I had pretty bad postpartum depression with my younger 2, and I really needed to read books where the dog wasn't going to die, nothing bad was going to happen to the kids. There's going to be a happy ending for these characters that I've invested myself in. I couldn't handle anything bad happening. Okay. I couldn't even read a cozy mystery. You know what I mean? The Murder in the Cupcake Shop was too much angst for me at that point. So I just read, I would have a baby in one arm, another baby screaming somewhere in the house, my toddler running around, and a paperback mass market from the library, in my other hand, and that was just how I got through a couple of years there, and it really was the guarantee of the happy ending that did it for me. And then when my kids were old enough, where I had 5 minutes to myself, I was well, I must monetize this, right? I should definitely write a book that makes perfect sense, and it did not make sense, but it worked out anyway.
I love that. And I love how you tied it into motherhood too, or how it came sort of organically out of that experience of motherhood. And I hear you. I was saying again beforehand that romance has gotten me through this pandemic so far, and it's the same thing. I just need the happy ending, and tragedy can happen along the way, anything can happen along the way, but like knowing that things turn out okay has gotten me through like night after night of the last 2.5 years to 3 years. Tracey, you're right below Kat on my screen. Go ahead.
I actually started reading romance at the age of 12. It sounds way too young, but it was very beneficial to me. For the same reasons. I love the happily ever after, obviously. But the thing that I loved most about romance was it centered women's stories. And I'm a kid, I'm a voracious reader, but there weren't a lot of books that centered sort of women's story and what they were going through and who was in their lives. And it also, I was living in a small town, and it just took me all over the world. And it opened me up to this idea that there was life beyond just this town that I was in. I mean, I knew reading those books that there was a big world out there and that there was space for me in that world. And, again, it's not like picking up a romance and I see that on page one, but the more you read them and the more you get immersed in these character stories, and they're set in so many different places, that's sort of the lessons you start to take from them. And I mean, at this point, I see romance everywhere. Like, there's nothing I'm watching where I'm not clued into the romance. It doesn't even have to be a romantic story, but I'm like, okay, I saw chemistry between those two. What's going on? Like, I want to know about that. The murder, okay, we'll get to that.
Mhm.
But let's focus on this relationship. It's like the Matrix. I just see life in romance and characters and relationship building. Yeah, I'm all about the romance.
I love that. Yeah, and it's actually, I feel the same way whenever I'm watching, like you said, like anything really, or reading any book. If there's a spark of chemistry, that is really enticing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Julie, what about you?
Yeah, so I would agree with Kat. Like, I didn't really start reading romance like very seriously until I had kids, and I was just like delirious from not having sleep, and I just needed something that was light and fun. And I always liked watching rom-coms, and so it was just like almost like a no-brainer. Like, oh, why haven't I started? Why didn't I do this before? Like, why didn't I start reading romance before? And so, one of the nice things that from starting to read romance when I did was that at that time, like, there was just starting to be more and more diverse romance, and so that was also really exciting for me. And so I've just been trying to keep up now because there's just so many books coming out, and I think that's really fantastic.
Absolutely. Now, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but did romance lead all three of you into writing in the first place? Or had you always wanted to write and then found romance as a vehicle through which to write?
For me, the first like actual substantial thing I wrote that wasn't for work was the first book I published, the first romance novel that I published. Like before that, I had, like I was one of those people who always told stories to myself in my head, but like the idea of putting it down on paper seemed really daunting, like really, really official, And I always like was, like really like goal oriented and productive. And so like I'm not going to spend my time writing a story that's not going to go anywhere, right? So yeah, no, it was that I really don't think I would have written a book if it hadn't been for romance.
Yeah, like I was, like I said, I was a big reader. I mean, from my earliest memories are of having stories read to me by my dad at night, and I just read throughout. And I think what comes with that is also trying your hand at writing. And so I was the kid who was writing like really bad poetry. I was the kid who, when the youth group at church had to do a play. I was the one writing that play. In college, when I wanted to procrastinate, I actually would go to the computer lab. This dates me, people, because we had computer labs. But I would go to the computer lab and I would write like romances for my friends, but only 3 chapters. So set up, some sexy times, and then the end, because the middle part is too much. It's too much hard work. So just those 3. But I believe it was my love of romance that really sort of made me want to try to do this professionally. I don't think I would have written anything else, like Kat said. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the same. Like, it wasn't until I started reading romance that I thought, oh, I would love to write something like this that could join all these other wonderful books that were, on the shelf. And I knew for myself, like, I really wanted to write something with a happy ending. And, that's what romance, that's like the only guarantee for romance, right? And there's a lot of room to bring in, like, rich backstories and different perspectives, and a lot of, romance is all about our characters, right? Like, people won't want to read the end of a romance novel if they don't like the characters that they're reading about. And so there's so much work that goes into developing our characters. And so all of those things were things that were like enjoyable for me. And so and actually, my first book, The Donut Trap, is the first thing I wrote, and it's also my debut. And so it's just really exciting that my passion project just became my first book. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And congratulations. Well, to all of you
Thank
guys.
you.
Yeah, it's exciting. So tell me, let's see. Oh, there's so many places to go from here, but I think let's pause and maybe each just offer the elevator pitch for the type of books. And I know it's hard to like condense the richness of your work into like the elevator pitch, but for people who aren't familiar with your work, how would you describe your books? We don't have to go in the same order, but like whoever wants to go first.
Do one of you guys like have something smart to say? No.
Oh my gosh. No.
I know. Well, you all have an interesting take on the romance genre, I think, which is why it's so fascinating to bring you all together, because you have such a variety of perspectives and characters and story arcs to share. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this is the elevator pitch, and I'm going to volunteer as tribute. I'm going to go first, but I would say that the type of stories I write are contemporary, because I think that suits my voice best. They will always feature a Black heroine. They are interracial, because that's sort of the niche that I have decided that I'm going to stand in, because I am in an interracial marriage and have been for over 2 decades. So when Julie talks about diversity and seeing yourself in the pages of what we write, that is why I write what I write. And I also think it's important that no matter what the plot of the book is, the story is about the characters figuring out like what their particular issue is, and it's that issue that they have to solve and figure out before the love that they've found will cement and be forever. Because I think that's really important. I think that's something that romance shines a light on and handles in a way that other genres really don't, and it is extremely important. So yeah. And sex. I'm sorry. And sex. There we go.
Yeah. We're gonna get to sex.
Oh, I was gonna say I write historical romance featuring queer characters, and if I had to make it as brief as possible, I would say like I'm trying to fill historical settings that I like very much as a reader with characters like me. You know what I mean? Like, I want characters who are queer, characters who have like mental health issues, physical health issues, like people that you don't always see in in romance novels, but which you're seeing a lot more of, right? And I try to give these characters the softest landing possible, like the lowest angst. Like I write pretty low angst stories, okay? I'm trying to make things as cozy for them and for the readers as possible, while also like sustaining a story, you know?
Mhm.
We're trying to.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie.
Yes. So I write contemporary romance. I would say generally they're lighthearted. I hope I can say they're funny. They're funny to me, and they center Asian American characters. And not only does it center on a romance, but also kind of like the community or like family unit that kind of surrounds these characters as well. It's typically what you'll see in my books, and just kind of exploring like different like complex dynamics between all of the characters. I don't like things. I feel like all of my stories are down to earth in that way, but ultimately generally lighthearted. So I really hope that whenever somebody picks up my books, like they'll smile or they'll laugh, and even if it might dive into some more sometimes some serious topics, nothing too painful. Generally low angst. So yeah.
Yeah, so you all talked a little bit about centering the characters and the relationship. And I think when I read romances, yeah, it's totally the character. I think, and forgive me, it's been a long day already, but I forgot who said it, that if you don't like the characters, you're not going to love the book. So whoever, maybe it was Julie. I totally agree. Yeah, I think from the beginning, if you're not drawn in by those characters, you don't really care what happens to them or if they get together in the end. So can you guys tell me a little bit about the relationships that you write and the relationships that you have in real life with your partner, if you're comfortable sharing, just whether you borrow, elements of your real life romance to create the romance on the page, or if it's total escapism for you and for your readers. Um,
Oh, it's total escapism. Yeah, like sorry. I always feel so bad, but like I'm not a romantic person. I don't like even value like romance in a partner. Like but I really like reading about it. Like I don't like it's not part of who I am, but enjoying it secondhand is part of who I am. And so, and I just like making characters happy in a way that may not be totally relatable to me.
Yeah. I think that's in part why people read romance too, right? Like I love my husband. I'm still with him after 20 years, but there's a reason that I read books about, other men who are very sexy who get together, so that resonates.
I mentioned so that I write interracial romance, and I am in an interracial marriage, and so what I write is a reflection of my relationship, and that's on purpose. I don't necessarily think I started out like when I wrote my first book thinking, oh, I am purposefully doing that. I mean, I knew certain things that I wanted to do. I knew, again, that my heroine was going to be Black, and I knew that my hero was going to be white, but I didn't do that with any sort of agenda. But, I'm a women's studies major, and one of the first things we learned is the personal is political. And I think that just sort of, comes out in my writing. And so the thing that I want, and I think that we're trying to accomplish in romance, is to have a space for everyone at the table. It should be a really huge table with lots of chairs. And I don't purport that what I write is the voice for every Black author or every author in an interracial relationship. But, for this small little slice, this is my voice. And I want to see the books that I love, as Kat mentioned, the books that I love, the settings I love, the plots that I love, I want to write those with characters that I would have loved to have seen as I was growing up and as I was starting, the relationship that that I'm still in. Like, that's really important to me. And so I do tend to take bits and pieces from life and put them in the book.
Yeah, Julie, how about you? And I'd love for you also to talk a little bit about whether it's challenging to write romance, to get into sort of the romance, the place where you can write a romance with small children. Like, is that a conflict?
I'm sorry. I'm gonna ask you to repeat like the original question because
Sure.
like my computer like totally froze, and so I'm just like nodding while everybody's answering the question. I don't remember I didn't hear what the question was.
Totally, yeah, and you can answer whichever question you want to answer. But the original question was whether you borrow from real life to write your romances, whether it's total escapism, like how your marriage or your partnership plays into the books you write, and then secondarily, how your kids either sort of like challenge the space that you need to put yourself in to write those books, or if that's a conflict.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do take some inspiration from like real life. So, like the Donut Trap, like takes some inspiration from my childhood when my family used to operate a donut shop, and so like that influenced the setting. Sometimes I think about different relationships, whether it's my marriage or with my friends or with my family, and like little like tidbits like might inspire certain kinds of scenes or conversations in the book. So I think that's really natural because we want to see, like, or at least for me, like I want to see kind of a sort of reflection of like the kind of perspective and kind of world that I've grown up in and I've lived and currently navigate now. As far as my kids, it is really hard. I mean, I definitely write when they're not in the house, like when they're at school or when they're sleeping, and so there's just no focus because if they're up and we're spending time together, like that is their time. And so I really have to be like in the house by myself when I'm writing. Like nobody bother, not even my husband, like they cannot bother me because I just will lose my train of thought very easily.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from Kat and Tracey on that as well. I just wonder, like, I know it's hard for me when my daughter is in the house as well to write anything. But I think it would be especially hard if I were trying to write something that was romantic or like a sex scene. Maybe not, but like that's just sort of what I imagine, is that it would be really hard to write about to get to embody a character physically and emotionally in that way when your child is next to you, kind of like having your kid sleep between you and your husband in bed, like that kind of thing for you and your spouse.
That was not an issue for me. Like that, like maybe it should have been, okay, but I wrote almost all of my first couple of books basically sitting next to my kids, okay? And I know they could read at that, like they were 6, so they could read at that point, like the youngest ones. And I'd just be like, go look at that. Okay. Like, and then they wouldn't look over my shoulder because I'm just doing boring grown-up stuff. I'm not watching Blue's Clues. Like, who cares what I'm doing? And or they would read their own book and that was it. Like it was like, it wasn't that much. It's not that different from writing an email, which sounds so unsexy. Okay. But like, especially with that first draft, like the first draft is just like, you're just making the dolls smash, like there's nothing sexy about it. Right. Like it's just sentences without predicates, like ugly. Yeah, I've done that on a plane. Okay. Like I've done it sitting next to my mom at a table. Like, like it has to get done. I'm going to get it done. I wrote from the beginning. I was writing in like snatched 15-minute increments, and so that was just the way it was going to be, right? At some point, once I realized that like I was going to be able to get like some amount of money for the stuff I was writing, I started hiring babysitters. Okay. Like, and then I would just like flee the house and then write sex scenes in a coffee shop surrounded by people, you know? But yeah, I definitely, yes, that has not been a problem for me. But now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it probably should have been, but that really speaks to how like I was so like desperate to do something that was for me, even if I was surrounded by a lot of other people, you know, like I was claiming that time for myself, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just didn't have the time or space to worry about who's sitting next to you. I love that.
That's so true. I didn't start trying to professionally write until my youngest started full day kindergarten. And so I tended to write at home when they were at school. And, you know, similar to Julie, when they came home, then like that time was over, unless it was deadline. And sort of as soon as I could get them into bed, then I'm staying up trying to finish. So I never had the problem of writing with them next to me, but it's the same thing like when actors talk about how filming sex scenes isn't sexy, writing them is not. It was sexy in my first book. I was like, oh, I'm finally like writing it and it's all so sexy. And now several books in, my first draft is like insert sex scene here, and I'll come back because it's not, I have an idea of what they're going to do, but I don't have time to write it. I need to get on to the other stuff, and then I come back and write that, and I have a playlist. I try to like get to like a frame of mind, and it's so technical, it just is. So I'm not really. I've written, a sex scene. I've drafted a sex scene in a coffee shop. You write where you write. It's our job, and hopefully we make it look very sexy and sensual or whatever. But behind the scenes, it's just like, what's another word for breast? God.
Or like, how do I feel about the word nipple? Do you know what I mean? Like, we're like you're really thinking about it, and like you're going off on like a mental tangent. Like, is nipple a sexy word? Like,
I know some people don't like panty, but I like that word. So, that's
like, is this the kind of book where I'm discussing fluids? And then you're, because you have to make that call. Yes. And that's all so, it is so unsexy. Sometimes when I'm doing line edits, I'll read through something I wrote and be like, this is a sexy thing. Like I made a sexy scene, and then, but this is like months after I've written it. And I'm like, oh, and I have enough, I'm removed from like the process of creation enough to like appreciate it for what it is,
Absolutely. That is exactly how it happens to me. There has to be way different time. And you're reading it again, not for the craft stuff, but either just to read or like the line or something just so far down. You're just like, oh my, yeah, all right. Ooh, this one is spicy. Okay. Yeah.
We're going to come back to writing good sex scenes, but Julie, in your experience of reading romances, what makes a bad sex scene? Like, what makes you go, oh no, that failed?
Oh my gosh, I've liked all the books I've read, so this is a very like difficult question.
Or what? You're so nice. You're such a nice person.
Well, because there's so much variety, right? And I've read books that are like Fade to Black, and there's Closed Door, or all the way to like very spicy, and like I don't know. I think the pacing has to be good, right? Like some writers do a really good job, like throwing in like dialogue as like things are happening, and there's just so many different ways to approach it. And so I think the only thing I could think of is pacing and like where it fits in the overall overall story. Like if if it, you know, some books will have like a whole chapter just dedicated to a sex scene, and some will just either fade to black or just have a couple pages. So I think yeah, that's the only thing I could come up with right now.
No, that's okay. Yeah, that's great.
Contortions. I'm just going to jump in there when
Please.
they are doing something that just physically is not possible.
Oh,
That takes that takes me out. Like if, you know, I'm going along and suddenly like they were in this position, but then you know, a leg or an arm or something does something else, and you're like, wait a minute, how do they do that from that position? And then also, and this is just me, but you know, penises that are too large. I don't want to feel like I'm birthing a baby every time. So those types of things.
Yeah, like when it's like every dick is the biggest dick is like, you know what I mean? Like eventually there's like inflation. Like I'm not impressed anymore. Okay. But that's only like if I've read like 7 or 8 romance novels by the same author in a row, and it's like, you know, and then you're like, wait, I see what you did. You know? But like for me, it's when it's I wish I could tell you why I get bored during some sex scenes and just find myself flipping through, you know, but I don't know why. It's probably like a mood reading issue, you know, where like sometimes I just don't like, you know, carry on, whatever, you know. Let's go back to the part where you're trying to like get funding for your small business. I'm really into that. but like other times it's because when there's no emotion involved, I get like that'll take me out of it completely. Cause I'm like, okay, like good for you. I don't need to hear about it. You know, like there doesn't always need to be emotion involved, but in order for me, the reader, to really care about like what you guys are doing in bed, I need to feel like emotionally invested in it, you know? And if that's not happening, then I'm going to just flip the page and move on to the next scene.
Story. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And we're going to get personal here. You don't have to answer, but I'm interested. Does writing about sex make you reflect on your own sex life in a different way, or to like think about, say you're writing something, you're like, oh, maybe I should try that sometime, you know? Or do you, for example, Tracey, when talking about the logistics of a scene and how bodies fit together, do you have to sometimes try it out and be like, oh yeah, an arm wouldn't bend that way?
Yes, that is true. But I'm going to take that I'm going to take that back from the X and, you know, put it in a PGR. But I do, sometimes if I'm trying to figure out something specific, I will, you know, ask my husband, like, you know, can we, you know, let's do this, or hold me like this, or hug me, or even just in a very, you know, PG way, let's lay on the bed and let me, you know, like throw my leg here and see if it actually would work, you know, like, because I said that's something that takes me out of a scene. So I want to make sure that when I am describing whatever it is I'm describing, that it's actually possible for the characters to do. So I do that. Yes. I would say that, you know, in terms of what I haven't written anything that I haven't tried. That's what I'll say. Yeah. I'm a grown woman. I can say that. Yes.
This is a safe space to say things. And you also don't have to share, but I appreciate the sharing. Safe space.
Safe space.
I feel like I definitely haven't done all the things that I've written about, partly because I'm often writing about people with different parts than I have, right? So like, but this is so unsexy. I keep doing this to you. Like I'm just like, I keep like unsexyifying everything. Like I often will be like, yeah, like they can only do that if they have good knees, you know, like you know. Or like, yeah, like I know these guys don't have any back problems or whatever. Like that's where my mind goes when I'm trying to choreograph this. Like that would destroy my neck for weeks. you know, but they're young and they're healthy and, good for them.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, it is very much like choreography. It's like, where does this hand go, and what, and I totally agree. Like the first draft is just smashing, like putting dolls together. It's just like, what's happening here? Well, my first book is Fade to Black, so there was just, I didn't even try. On my first book, I was like, no. But for my second book, I was just like, all right, well, we'll throw something in there, but it's definitely not as spicy as like what I think like a avid romance reader will usually expect. So yeah, I mean, I think it's up to everybody's like comfort and also imagination as to like what they throw into their book, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's take a hard shift to motherhood from that question.
Well, it's related.
It is related, yeah. Let's talk about that. There's no question, but Julie, sex and motherhood are related. Go.
Well, I mean, okay, so I was thinking back to like the 3 words that you had all of us answer, and so I was just thinking like, motherhood is a really big juggling act, right? So there's just always something to do, and prioritizing like our kids' needs, and I think that was just a really big shift for me. Like before I had kids, I was just very organized and like just always had the room to like do whatever task or thing I needed to do on my own time at my own pace. And like once you have kids, like that's just thrown out the window. And it's not just like the things that you have to do, but also like being like emotionally present. And because if they're having a bad day, everybody's having a bad day, right? And so it's all to everyone's benefit if the kids are in like good spirits and good health and all of that. And so yeah, it's just one big juggling act. And I thought that was also really related to writing, right? Just being able, like, when I think about the kind of writing that I've had to do this past year, like, with so much stuff going on, like it's been really hard to kind of focus and write. And so as well as like getting a book published, there's always like emails and things that you have to do. And so yeah, it's just always, I think for me, just really learning to be adaptable and flexible, and really being like giving myself enough space also to be patient and to be present with my kids and with my writing, right? And in their own spaces, right?
Yeah, definitely. Kat and Tracey. Hard shift from sex to motherhood.
When my first kid was born, like I resisted the label mother, like for, you know what I mean? Like it felt so loaded, right? Like I'm definitely this kid's parent, but mother seems like you're making an awful lot of assumptions. You know what I mean? Like you're like, I'm like, and whatever the assumptions were they were true. Do you know what I mean? Like I was like super duper hippie when he was a baby, like you know what I mean? Like I breastfed him forever, so whatever the assumptions were are like accurate, but I still didn't like people like having all of like what like being a mother meant and then like applying that to me without even knowing me. And I felt like just by saying she's a mother, that was happening. Okay. Like, and I don't know how better to explain that, but I feel like that also is when like I felt the same way when when people started asking, what do you do for a living? And it would be like, I'm a writer, like, and it felt the same way, where like I'm giving you permission to make a lot of assumptions about me and my life just by saying that. And then I just started saying that I freelance because like I didn't like I felt like that was none of anybody's business, and I don't know why, but like yeah, it feels like both writing and motherhood feel like possibly private acts that everybody gets to have an opinion on because they've either had a mother or seen a mother, or they've read a book or seen a book. Like everybody has an idea about it that may not really be true, and that feels kind of uncomfortable when applied to you.
Yeah, and Another guest mentioned this, and I was like, yes, that's very true. So when you're pregnant, you can't hide your motherhood. Like, it's right out there. And you can't hide the fact that you, in most cases, had sex to become pregnant. So it's like a visible, like, beacon of your impending motherhood and your sexual, like, your private sex life. I found that to be incredibly uncomfortable. So I hear you, Kat. Yeah.
When I was pregnant with my first, I was teaching high school. Okay. And one of my students said something like, you like about one of their, I had a bunch of pregnant students also at the same time. And one of my students said, you may be wondering if people are having sex, but then they get pregnant and you know for sure. And it was like such an obvious, like, it's so obvious, but like, you know what? Like, yeah, that is what it's like.
Yeah. Well, in high school too. Oh my gosh. Yeah. The wondering about people's sexual habits, and then like the evidence is right there. Ooh, that would be hard to be, for many reasons. But
Right.
Tracey, I saw you nodding along a little bit there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Kat said some things that was interesting. I'd said earlier that I started reading romance at 12, and it might have been a little too early. Well, when I was really young, I saw a video of a woman giving birth and like the graphics. So I saw where the baby came from. And I was like, I am never, ever, ever doing that. And for years, I would say I'm not having children to my parents still say, oh my God, I used to say that all the time. And it made us so sad. But I really believe that because I saw that video and that did not look fun or pleasant at all. And I was just like, I'm not doing that. And it wasn't really, until I met my husband and we got married, and suddenly it was like, oh, okay, this is the next step. Okay. Even with that said, I'm a Black woman and I grew up in a family of Black women. Everybody worked. There was no stay at home. That wasn't even an issue. And so I assumed that would be what I would do as well, that after I got married and I had my kids, that I would go to work, and that's what would happen. I really underestimated sort of how much becoming a mother affected me. I didn't expect it, excuse me. I didn't expect the things that it made me think of the first time I thought about my mortality, thought about the fact that I would die is after I had kids, because I was trying to think like, oh, then they will grow up and they will have kids and I will see their kids. And then suddenly I was like, oh, like, you start doing the math. I don't want to bring people down, but like, these are the things I did not anticipate how it would change me, and how there would be things where before I was like, of course, this is what's going to happen. And after I was like, no, like, I made certain decisions. And one of them was to stay home with my children. And I had, 3 children under, in 4 years. And it was a lot. And as someone who was used to working and used to having an identity that was based on me and what I did, having an identity that suddenly was based on having children, and we'd moved to a new place. And so everyone who knew us knew, oh, she is Jim's wife. She is her kid's mother, but no one knew anything about me and my accomplishments. And that hit me really hard as well. And so, there's a, good chunk, 5 or 6 year period where I'm not sure how I made it through. I did, obviously, to come out on the other side, and romance was a big part of that. And it was also the thing that once I knew that my youngest was starting kindergarten, it was like, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get back to me, and I can go back to law. But God, romance, I just want to take this moment and try to do this. And it was the best decision, I ever made. I sometimes, I know I did the right thing staying home with them, but I do also wonder about if I'd made a different choice, and maybe this is a motherhood thing, a guilt, always wondering if we did the right thing. Sometimes I feel like, if, are they sufficient enough? I feel like they are very dependent. I wonder, would they be more sufficient if I had not been home and been there all the time? I don't know. But I'm sorry, I got off. Anyway.
No. This is all so
Yes.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's so many things that I want to say, and I think Matt and Julie probably want to say too. First, and Tracey, I'm going to leave it with you for a second. And can you tell us how writing romance brought you back to yourself? You said it was something like you had to get out of there, and you were going to do this thing, and this was yours to do. How did romance help you come back to yourself? And then maybe Julie, if that resonates with you and you want to talk a little bit about that as well, sure.
Because it was something that was, it was something that I felt like I was using my brain and my creativity in a way that I had not for a while. And it's not to say that, staying at home, like that's easy. It's not. I'm exercising lots of other different parts, but it allowed me to be creative in a different way. But the other thing is that in my dealings with other people, that changed, so that people weren't, again, dealing with me, as my husband's wife or my kid's mother, and the assumptions they made about that, about my intelligence or my capabilities because of that. Moving into this different arena, I felt like people were starting to see me again, and the comments or whatever was about things that I was doing. And because writing is so personal, like people are judging and talking about your work, and that's you, like that's me. When they are talking about the book or the story or things they like or don't like, fairly or unfairly, that's me. And that's, that's a part of me that they're judging. And so I just felt like for the first time in years, I was being seen again. And I didn't realize how much I'd missed that. And I didn't realize how important that was for me and to me. So it was really important. And because I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't read romance. I mean, romance, man. It saved me. Yeah.
Yeah, and Julie, I'm going to pass it over to you in a second. I think that'll resonate with a lot of people, whether they write romance or any other type of writing. I think it's something you do, sort of toil in isolation, but it's yours and it's you writing it, and people, when they read your words, see you, and they can form their own opinions about you, but it's you that they're seeing on the page. And that's so important, I think, especially following, as you said, when you have very small children and everything is so much about them. And I remember being not upset by this, but just sort of taken aback when I visited my daughter's pediatrician when she was born. And it was no longer Laura or, Ms. Ehrlich or whatever. It was Mom. Like the doctors and the dentists and the teachers all refer to you as Mom. And I'm like, I'm not your mom. Don't call me that.
I hate that so much. It drives me up the wall.
It's awful. Yes.
I live in the South. Like, ma'am is right there. Okay. Like, you have that as an option. Okay. Or like, hey, you is also like, but also, okay. And instead of mom, it's like, my kids rarely even call me mom. Okay, you know what I mean? Like, they have like, they at least when they were younger, it was like mommy or mama or whatever, Like, it's just so weird. Like, I don't need the dental hygienist to call me mom. Like you don't have to call me anything.
Yes.
Right, they do.
Yeah.
So it's so hard to like maintain your sense of self when everyone around you, when you're in that period with small children, calls you mom, and it's like, I guess that's just, I'm like not just mom, but
No, but
primarily mom, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Julie.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I resonate so much with what Tracy said. I started writing because, there was my kids were very young, and so of course all my attention was going to them. But then also similarly, like my career was kind of stalling a little bit. Like I was not sure if I was gonna like get unemployed and be unemployed for a while, and so it really kind of shook me because it was like, well, what else do I do? Like where do I fit in with all of this? If like my professional identity is kind of, on hold, and like, everything else is just mom, right? And so, yeah, like writing was definitely totally like a project just for me, and just to show like I could do something else too, right? And also in my field, like we always have icebreakers, and so like one of the icebreakers is always like, well, what's your hobby? I'm like, I don't have a hobby. I have 2 kids. Like there's no time to do anything else. But I found time to write, and it was just really wonderful because I never thought I would write, even though like growing up, like I had many teachers who would encourage me and all that, but I never really tried to write anything. And so, I started the project really just to see if I could do it. And so, and that's what really kept me motivated to write, even like in between things or when the kids were asleep. So, but yeah, it's definitely something that really helped, at least I could always come back to at the end of the day and say like, this is something that I did and it was just for me. And so, yeah, it's really fulfilling,
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about the reception of all of your work, and whether having others read your books has changed your perception of yourself, of your relationships, of your craft. Having it out in the world like that, how's that felt?
I crave a lot of external validation. Okay. Like I know this is like not my like my toxic trait is that I need people to tell me that I'm doing a good job. Okay. Like, and I've always been like that. Like I always needed to have good grades, not because I needed to be the best, but because I needed someone to pat me on the head and tell me that I did the best, So like when you're writing, it is possible to only like if you play your cards right, you can make it so that you never see negative feedback of your book. You know what I mean? Like, or that you rarely do, right? Like you don't go on Goodreads, you don't like search your name, okay? Your publicist is only going to send you the good stuff, right? Yeah. And so if you really, really protect your ego, you will only see the good thing. And then you get, and so like when you get a good review, you're like, yes, I did a great job, and like, and that makes me feel fantastic, because like I don't I don't think that I don't need to hear criticism. You know what I mean? Like I do that. I can do that all by myself. I don't need to outsource that, but I can't do the praise part by myself. And one thing about like being a writer is that you do get positive feedback. Okay. Like since you're doing it in the public realm, like the people are going to tag you when they have a nice thing to say about your books, and then you see that. And like, that's a nice thing that just happened. That's a positive interaction. And like, yeah, there's going to be some garbage thrown in there too, but it's like it's a small fraction of the rest of it. That was so egotistical, but I'm standing by every bit. Okay, owning it.
No, I think it's like a solid advice not to read bad reviews on Goodreads. Right? Like that's just good advice.
So
like love yourself enough to never do that.
There you go. Just don't do it. Don't do
or
it.
if you need to know like whether there's like a shitstorm brewing, you can have someone else do that. Like you can have a friend, a trusted friend who isn't going to come to you and be like, they're saying terrible things, Kat, like you can have someone else make sure that everything is like that that no one's really distressed or something. I don't know, but like you can have someone else do that.
Yeah.
And if you really have to look, which sometimes I do, you can chase it then by looking up reviews for like the best books, like Shakespeare, and look at all the terrible reviews and be like, well, Shakespeare got a 1-star review.
Yeah.
So that makes me feel a little better when I
Totally.
Tracey, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I know people say like if you're a writer, you can write anything, or you can just write for yourself and you don't have to have people read it. And that may be true. But I don't I don't think that I would do that now. It's very hard to write a book. So if I'm going through all of that, I would like someone to read it and to enjoy it. And I really do. I like when readers reach out and say that they, have enjoyed, what I've written, and it does not get old. And I don't mean that in a way like, oh, whatever. But like if someone tags me and says, I just read this book and it was so amazing, and I really like that, makes my day, because that's, what I want to do. Like I'm writing this story and I want this to be out there for people to read and enjoy. And knowing that they do, I feel like, okay, I've done my job in this instance. And that feels really good. That never gets old at all. So I've been happy for the most part. Yeah.
That's a really solid point. Because you hear, like, I know people who write for themselves, and I both envy that and am confused by it, because I'm just like, sure, I'll write in a journal or something, but like you said, it's hard to write a book. So you want that, like, if you're going to spend years, like sometimes almost a decade or whatever, to writing a book, yeah, you kind of want people to read it and then appreciate it at the end of the day, right? And give you 5-star reviews on Goodreads and Amazon. Julie, I saw you nodding along.
Well, okay. So, when I started writing my book, like it was totally like, I really just intended it to stay on my computer. Like it was never going to see the light of day. And I remember the reason why I waited so long to write. I remember it earlier in my 20s, like, I had met other writers and they were like, oh yeah, I have a writing group. We share work and we get feedback. And like the whole thought of that just terrified me. And I was like, oh no, I'm never going to do that. And then when I really decided to write, then I remembered that feedback or that advice. And I thought, oh, I really need to be comfortable sharing it with somebody. Because then if I ever publish it, it's just going to, like anybody can pick it up and read it. And so I wanted it to be good, of course. But it was definitely a hard thing to wrap my mind around that.
I think Julie might have frozen. Looks like she did. We'll come back to Julie to finish the thought if she rejoins us. What I'll do is I'll remove her from the feed for a second and bring her back. There we go. Oh, Julie. Well, we are actually at the hour anyway. Although this seems like a weird place to leave it. So maybe we'll go around really quickly, and let's go back to sex for a second and hope that Julie can rejoin us in a sec. I'll take her down and I'll bring her back up when she unfreezes. But Kat and Tracey, let's go back to sex. And you've already kind of answered this, but I'd love to just sort of come back to it. Tell me, what makes a good sex scene? We talked about what makes a bad sex scene, but to you, what's the most important ingredient for a really good sex scene? And Julie's back with us now. We're closing on the question, what makes a really good sex scene? What's the ingredient, your favorite ingredient, we'll put it that way, for a really good sex scene?
I like writing characters who are like talking to one another when they're having sex, like not necessarily dirty talk, but just like sort of like they're interacting in the same way that they always interact. It just carries into the bedroom. I love that because like I think that, my favorite sex scenes to write or to read are the ones where the characters are having a good time in a way that's specific to the two of them, where it's like it's a scene that could only exist between those two people, right? Like it's that like really specific connection. And so that's what I like.
Dialogue in the bedroom. I love it.
I like visceral reactions in the writing. So I like being in the place of whoever the POV character is. And so it's not just that they kiss, but it's like, how did that kiss make them feel? And what did it do to their body before we move on to the next thing? That's what I like. Yeah.
I would say, yeah, I think just having some sort of dialogue, but also like the way that they check in with each other, I think is always something that makes it feel more intimate and more romantic. And so I think that's what appeals to me the most.
Yeah. And, we're going to, of course, be promoting all of your books on social and through the podcast, but think of a book other than your own, which we'll be promoting anyway. What's your favorite romance book? What's your favorite romance? Or author? It could be an author other than yourself. And we'll end there.
Okay, so the book that I recommend the most.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, so the book that I recommend the most, which at this point is like, it's been years, and I think I recommend it once a week, is He Did Rivalry by Rachel Reed. It's a hockey romance. Okay, and when I read this book the first time, I had no interest in sports romance or especially hockey, and this book is so charming. It is like purportedly an enemies to lovers book, except they're like definitely not. And they just adore one another from the beginning, and they're just so dumb about it. It's so there's nothing not to like if you just enjoy reading about idiots in love. So
I would never pick up a hockey romance, but I might have to check that one out.
I don't know how I landed here, and now I read like 3 a month.
Yes, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to recommend a book, because naming my favorite romance or author is, I'm not prepared to do that. But the book that I recommend, or the author that I recommend to like my friends or people who are just getting into romance, is Mia Sosa. More specifically, her last 2 releases, The Worst Best Man and The Wedding Crasher. They're just so funny and so smart and clever, and sexy, just really, really sexy. I think the combination of like finding yourself laughing at something that's so hysterical, and then like a couple of pages later, just like, oh yeah, like that is the best combination. And she's managed to do that really, really well. So that's why I would recommend. The Wedding Crasher is her latest release. It has Magic Mike karaoke. It has a sex party. It has trips to Vegas. I mean, it has everything. So give that one a try.
Okay.
I would say the one I always, as my go-to recommendation, is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Wong. So, usually when now that my friends know that I write romance or rom-coms, they always ask me now for recommendations. And so, yeah, that's usually my first go-to recommendation, because I feel like it was also the first one that for me, like, I really like, not just the romance, but also like just some of the cultural aspects that were presented in the book, that it was like the first time that I saw all of that in one really funny, really sexy kind of book. And so that was really exciting for me. So I always use that as my go-to recommendation.
Those are 3 that I will immediately check out. And those are really quite different from one another. So they'll keep us going for a while. And of course, the 3 of you and your amazing books, which everyone who is listening or tuning in tonight must immediately order. And thank you again, Kat, Julie, and Tracey, for joining me. Stick around for a second after I close so I can say goodbye, but it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And thank you all for joining us tonight. If you enjoyed the episode as much as I did, please consider becoming a patron or patroness to help me keep this podcast going and to have more conversations about writing and motherhood and sex and all of the things in between. And until next time, have a wonderful night, great week, and I'll see you next week.